My name is Martha Green, and for 30 years I thought I understood what forever meant. Forever was the coffee brewing in the morning before Robert left for work. Forever was the laughter echoing through the hallway when our son, Daniel, was little. Forever was the sound of his boots in the porch and his voice calling, "I'm home, sweetheart." I didn't realize that forever could end on a quiet Tuesday morning in early spring. The day he left wasn't stormy, like in the movies. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no tears soaking the carpet. It was too calm, and that calmness is what hurt the most. Robert sat at the kitchen table, the same one where we'd shared countless dinners, birthday cakes, and hard talks. He had his hands clasped together, staring at the steam rising from his coffee. "Martha," he said finally, his voice so flat it didn't sound like him, "we need to talk." I wiped my hands on the dish towel and sat across from him, a knot tightening in my stomach. He didn't look up right away, and I remember how the morning light from the window landed on the gray in his hair. It used to be something I loved, proof of the years we'd lived together. But that morning it just looked like distance. He cleared his throat. "I met someone." The world went very still. The clock on the wall ticked 3 times before I found my voice. "Met someone?" I repeated, the words small, like they didn't belong in my mouth. He nodded, still looking down. "Her name's Emily. She's younger." Younger. The word hit like cold water. Not prettier, not smarter, not kinder. Just younger. I wanted to ask how young, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. I was afraid of the answer. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said, "but it did, and I can't keep pretending I'm happy here." I remember staring at the table, tracing the faint burn mark from a candle we'd once left too long on our anniversary. I could still smell the wax, even now. "Happy?" I whispered. "Robert, we built a life together. We raised a son. We've been through everything from funerals to graduations." "I know," he interrupted softly. "And I'll always be grateful. But I need something different now. I need to feel alive again. Alive." I wanted to laugh, but all that came out was a long, shaky breath. Because how do you tell a man that you were the one keeping him alive all these years? That when he got sick, you were there. When he lost his job, you stood by him. When he lost faith in himself, you reminded him who he was. And now, he was walking away for someone who hadn't even seen him at his worst. When he packed his things, he didn't take much. Just clothes, a few books, his shaving kit. He didn't take the photo from our wedding day that sat on his dresser. He didn't take the old watch his father gave him, though I noticed it was gone the next week. He didn't even take the quilt I'd made him years ago. It's strange how the small details hurt more than the big ones. The morning he drove away, I stood by the window, clutching my coffee like it was a lifeline. The gravel crunched under his tires as he pulled out of the driveway. He didn't look back. Not once. When his car disappeared down the road, I stood there for a long time, until the coffee went cold, until the light shifted, until my reflection in the glass was all that was left. That was the moment I realized the house wasn't just empty. It was hollow. The days that followed blurred together like watercolor. People talk about grief like it's one sharp moment, the breaking point. But the truth is, grief is slow. It's waking up every morning and realizing there's one less toothbrush in the holder, one less cup to wash, one less heartbeat beside you in the dark. I tried to keep busy. I cleaned every room in the house, scrubbed the counters until they shined, rearranged the furniture, as if changing the shape of the space could somehow change the fact that he was gone. Neighbors stopped by at first. Mrs. Carter from across the street brought pie. Janice from church dropped off a casserole. Each visit came with soft voices and two kind eyes, the kind that pity you but don't know what to say. I thanked them, smiled, and watched them leave, knowing full well they'd whisper later, "Poor Martha. He left her for that young woman from the hardware store." Because that's how small towns are. News spreads faster than the morning paper. And soon enough, everyone knew. Everyone except Daniel, our son. He lived 2 states away, busy with his own family. I didn't tell him. Not yet. How could I? How do you tell your child that the man who taught him how to throw a baseball has walked away from everything he built? One night, about a week later, I sat alone on the porch swing. The air smelled like lilacs. They were blooming early that year. And the moonlight shimmered across the old oak tree Robert once hung a swing from when Daniel was 5. The boards creaked softly beneath me, and I thought of all the evenings we'd sat here, holding hands, dreaming about retirement, about traveling, about growing old together, and just like that I realized I was still doing it, still thinking we. I wasn't ready to say I. That night I pulled out my old journal. It had been sitting in the drawer for years. Leather cover worn, pages yellowed. The first entry was from 1992, the year Daniel was born. The last entry was dated 3 years ago when Robert and I had taken a trip to the coast. I remember writing, "I think we've finally found peace." Peace. What a cruel word. I opened to a blank page, stared at it for a while, and finally wrote, "Robert left today. I don't know how to breathe without him yet, but I will. I have to." The following weeks were quiet. Too quiet. I stopped turning on the TV. The silence hurt less than hearing the laughter of strangers. I cooked smaller meals, soups, salads, toast, things that didn't make the house smell like Sunday dinners. I started walking in the mornings again, through the winding streets of Willow Creek. The town was small but beautiful, white fences, blooming gardens, an old church steeple that caught the sunrise. Everyone knew everyone, and though their smiles were polite, I could feel their curiosity behind the curtains. Sometimes I'd pass by Hollow's Cafe, the diner where Robert and I had our first date. I could never go in. The smell of coffee and fried eggs made my chest tighten. Once I saw him there, through the glass, sitting with her. Emily. She looked so young, maybe 30, maybe less. She had that easy kind of beauty, the kind untouched by years of sacrifice or sleepless nights. Her laughter filled the room like a song, and for a moment I couldn't hate her. Because I'd once looked that way too, and maybe she didn't know she'd taken something that wasn't hers. Maybe she thought she'd found love. But the ache that followed me home that day was like a shadow that wouldn't fade. About a month after he left, I received a letter. It wasn't from Robert. It was from the bank, a reminder of a joint account that needed closing. I drove into town the next morning to handle it. As I stood in line, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass door. Neat hair, pressed blouse, small pearl earrings. I looked put together, but inside, I felt like dust held together by habit. When I reached the counter, the clerk smiled kindly. "Mrs. Green, Ms." She froze, unsure of what to call me. I smiled faintly. "Mrs. is fine," because somehow letting go of that title felt like erasing my entire life. That night, I lit a candle and sat by the window again. The flame flickered, reflecting off the glass like a heartbeat. For the first time, I let myself cry. Not the quiet, polite tears I'd allowed before. but deep, shaking sobs that came from the part of me that had been silenced for too long. I cried for the girl I once was, the one who believed in forever. I cried for the woman I'd become, the one who had forgotten who she was without someone else to love. And when the tears finally stopped, I whispered to the dark, "I'll be okay. Maybe not tonight, but someday." That was the night something shifted in me. I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of my healing. Because the moment you speak hope, even if it's just a whisper, the heart starts to listen. The next morning, I made coffee for one and drank it slowly, watching the sunrise paint the sky pink and gold. The same sunrise that had greeted me every day for 30 years. But this time, it looked different. Because for the first time in a long while, it wasn't our sunrise. It was mine. And somewhere, deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of the part where I learned how to live again, without him. And maybe, just maybe, that would lead me to something far more precious than the love I lost. Maybe it would lead me to peace. If someone had asked me before what silence sounded like, I would have said, peace. Now I know better. Silence doesn't always mean calm. Sometimes it's the loudest thing in the room. It's the space where a laugh should be. It's the creak of a floorboard when no one's there. It's the sound of your own heartbeat reminding you that you're still alive, even when you wish you didn't feel quite so much. That first month after Robert left, the house became too quiet. It wasn't just an absence of noise. It was an absence of life. Every corner felt like it remembered something. The dent in the couch cushion where he used to sit, the coffee ring on the nightstand from his mug, the jacket still hanging by the door. Ghosts of ordinary days. I tried to fill the quiet. I left the radio on, but the cheerful country songs only made me lonelier. I tried watching TV, but the laughter of strangers felt like mockery. So I started talking to myself. "Morning, Martha," I'd say, making coffee. "Don't forget the cream." It was silly, but it made me feel less invisible. One evening, I caught my reflection in the window and realized I hadn't smiled in weeks. The woman looking back at me had gentle lines around her eyes and soft silver in her hair. She looked tired, yes, but also not defeated. There was still something in her eyes that hadn't been broken. I remember whispering, "You're still here." And for the first time, I believed it. The days passed slowly, one melting into the next. I took up small projects to keep my hands busy. I planted flowers in the garden, lilies, petunias, and the same yellow roses Robert once said reminded him of sunshine. It was hard not to think of him while I dug in the soil, but in a strange way, it felt healing. The earth doesn't ask you to be strong, it just asks you to show up. When my neighbor Janice stopped by, she leaned over the fence, her straw hat tilted to one side. "You're out early, Martha," she said. I smiled. "Trying to get these roots to settle before the rain." Janice nodded, her eyes soft. "Good for you. You always did have the prettiest yard on this street." She meant well, but I could see the sympathy behind her words. The whole town was whispering, but at least Janice didn't pretend not to know. After she left, I kept working until my back ached, then sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea. The late afternoon sun cast a golden haze over Willow Creek. The distant sound of a church bell marked the hour, and for a moment everything felt almost normal. Almost. A week later, I started volunteering at the local library. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly shelving books and helping children find picture books, but it gave me a reason to get up in the morning. Mrs. Thompson, the librarian, was a kind woman in her 60s with white curls and a voice that always sounded like she was telling a bedtime story. She welcomed me with open arms. "You'll love it here," she said. "Books have a way of keeping us company." She was right. There was something comforting about the scent of old pages, the hush of people reading, the feeling that the world still held stories worth telling. Every afternoon, I'd make a pot of tea in the staff room and write in my journal before heading home. It was during one of those quiet moments that I noticed a young woman standing by the counter, clutching a small stack of books. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around like a bird that had flown too far from its nest. When she finally approached, her voice was soft. "Excuse me," she said. "Could I check these out?" I looked up and froze. It was her, Emily, the young woman my husband had left me for. For a moment, my mind went blank. I stared at her face, the smooth skin, the hesitant smile, the trembling hands. She looked nothing like the confident woman I'd seen laughing in the diner weeks ago. I felt my chest tighten, my heart hammering painfully. "Of course," I said finally, forcing my voice to stay calm. As I scanned the books, I noticed the titles: Healing After Betrayal, Finding Yourself Again, Women Who Rise. I didn't say a word, but I could feel the irony hanging in the air between us. "Here you go," I said, sliding the stack toward her. She met my gaze for just a second, and in her eyes, I saw something unexpected. Fear. "Thank you," she murmured. Then she turned and left, her shoulders hunched like someone carrying a heavy secret. I watched her walk out the door and realized my hands were shaking. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of her face kept replaying in my mind. What could she possibly be afraid of? She had Robert. She had youth, beauty, and the life she wanted. Why did she look so lost? I thought of calling Daniel, finally telling him everything, but I couldn't bring myself to. He'd want to come home, and I didn't want him to see me like this. I didn't want him to worry. Instead, I went back to my journal. "I saw her today," I wrote. "Emily. She's not what I expected. She looked fragile. Sad, even. I should hate her, but all I felt was pity. Maybe love built on betrayal doesn't last long. Maybe she's learning that now." As spring gave way to summer, the house began to feel a little less empty. I hung new curtains, painted the porch railing, and even baked again. Just small things, muffins and pies. At church, people still whispered, but I learned to smile through it. Because sometimes grace means standing tall, even when the world wants to see you broken. One Sunday after service, Pastor Allen approached me. He was a kind man with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to see right through the walls people built around themselves. "Martha," he said, "how have you been holding up?" I hesitated, then smiled faintly. "One day at a time, Pastor." He nodded. "That's all any of us can do. You know, sometimes God removes people from our lives not to punish us, but to protect us." I thought about that for days afterward. Protect me. From what? From Robert's selfishness? From losing myself trying to keep him happy? Maybe. Or maybe, I thought, God was giving me a chance to find me again. The next time I saw Emily was at the farmer's market. She was standing by the honey stall, her hand hovering over the jars, when she looked up and saw me. Her eyes widened slightly, then she offered a small, nervous smile. "Martha," she said softly. "Hi." I blinked, caught off guard that she even remembered my name. "Emily." We stood there awkwardly for a moment, surrounded by the chatter of the market. Then she spoke again. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I frowned. Sorry? For everything, she whispered. For hurting you, for being part of this mess. I never meant for things to happen like they did. Her voice trembled, and for the first time, I noticed the faint shadows under her eyes. She looked exhausted. Before I could respond, she glanced over her shoulder as if afraid someone might see her talking to me. Please, she said, I shouldn't even be here, but I just wanted you to know Then she turned and hurried away, disappearing into the crowd. I stood there, stunned, and in that moment, something shifted inside me again. The bitterness I'd been holding on to loosened just a little. Maybe she wasn't my enemy. Maybe we were both just women who'd loved the same man and both been broken by him in different ways. When I got home that evening, I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The sun was setting behind the trees, casting long golden rays across the yard. The air smelled of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel completely alone. I thought about Emily, how her apology had sounded more like a cry for help, and something deep inside told me this wasn't the last time our paths would cross. Maybe life had a strange way of weaving stories together. Maybe forgiveness wasn't something you gave once. Maybe it was something you practiced, one heartbeat at a time. That night, I closed my journal with a quiet sigh and whispered, Lord, help me forgive him, and help me forgive her too, not for them, but for me. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird sang, and the house didn't feel quite so quiet anymore. Because when you start forgiving, even in small whispers, the silence begins to soften. It begins to heal. By summer's end, Willow Creek had settled into its gentle rhythm again, the church bells at noon, the children's laughter drifting from the park, and the sweet scent of apple pies cooling on windowsills. My life, too, found a kind of rhythm, not happiness, not yet, but quiet steadiness. Each morning I'd wake early, pour a cup of coffee, and step onto the porch to watch the sun rise over the hills. There was peace in that. A kind of slow, deliberate peace that comes only after you've survived a storm. Still, some mornings I caught myself glancing down the road, half expecting Robert's truck to pull into the driveway. The heart, it seems, doesn't always listen to reason. It was on one of those bright mornings that I saw her again. Claes Twynen stepped back from the post office, carrying a few letters and a jar of homemade jam Janice had given me when I spotted her across the street. She stood outside the bakery, her hair tied up, wearing a pale yellow dress that fluttered in the breeze. She looked thinner than before. Her smile when she greeted the baker was polite but forced. As I watched, Robert's car pulled up. My stomach tightened involuntarily. He stepped out, his usual crisp shirt and that confident stride I used to find so reassuring. But something was different. There was tension in his movements, like a man always bracing for an argument. When he handed her a small paper bag, she smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. He said something, I couldn't hear what, and she nodded quickly, shrinking back a little. Then he got in the car and drove away. I stood there for a long moment, watching her stare after him. She looked trapped. That image stayed with me all week. I couldn't shake it, no matter how much I tried to distract myself with housework or the library. At night, when I closed my eyes, I kept seeing her face, the sadness, the quiet fear in her expression. Finally, one afternoon at the library, I saw her again. She came in just before closing, her sunglasses hiding most of her face, a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck even though the day was warm. "Hi, Martha," she said softly, almost like she was afraid to be heard. I nodded. "Hello, Emily." She hesitated, clutching a return slip. "I just wanted to bring these back." I took the books from her. Healing After Betrayal among them. My heart ached a little. As I stamped the return dates, I said quietly, "How are you doing?" Her fingers fidgeted with the strap of her purse. "Fine," she said quickly. Then, after a pause, "No, not really." I looked up. She glanced toward the door before whispering, "Can I talk to you? Just for a minute?" I nodded and gestured toward the small reading nook in the corner. We sat down, surrounded by the smell of paper and dust and the low hum of the air conditioner. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. "Robert isn't who I thought he was." The words hung heavy in the air. "I thought we'd be happy," she continued, eyes filling with tears. "But he's so different now. He gets angry so easily. He tells me what to wear, who to talk to, even where I can go. Sometimes I feel like I'm walking on glass." I didn't know what to say. My first instinct was disbelief. Not because I didn't believe her, but because I'd seen this before. That controlling edge, that quiet cruelty that hides behind charm. I'd lived it. I'd excused it for years because I told myself, he's just tired. He's just under pressure. But hearing her say it out loud, it was like hearing an echo from my own past. "Emily," I said gently, "you don't owe me an explanation, but you don't deserve to live in fear." She swallowed hard. "I know. I don't know what to do. Everyone in town thinks we're perfect, and he makes sure I never forget that I'm the lucky one." That word again. Lucky. How many times had I said that about my own marriage? When she left that day, I watched her go with a heaviness in my chest. It was strange. The woman who had taken my husband's love now seemed like the one who needed saving. That night, I sat on my porch and watched the fireflies glow in the dark. The world felt small and quiet, but my thoughts were loud. Was this what Robert had become? Or had he always been that way and I'd just never seen it clearly until now? I remembered the little moments about day. The way he'd snap if dinner was late, the way he'd make decisions for both of us without asking. The subtle control hidden under the pretense of care. And I realized that maybe Emily wasn't seeing a new version of Robert. She was seeing the truth. I wrote in my journal that night, maybe we were both fooled. Maybe he never wanted love, only control. And maybe the best thing that ever happened to me was the day he walked away? It felt strange, writing that. Almost disloyal. But it also felt freeing. A few weeks passed before I saw Emily again. This time it was at the grocery store. She was standing near the canned goods aisle, staring at a box of cereal like she'd forgotten what she came for. When she turned and saw me, she smiled faintly. "Hi," I nodded. "Hi, dear." She hesitated before speaking. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." Was he ever gentle with you?" she asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. I thought about it for a moment. "Yes," I said softly. "At first, he could be kind, thoughtful, funny even. But over time, it changed. He wanted things his way. Always." She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. "I thought I was the problem. He keeps telling me I don't appreciate him, that I'm ungrateful, that I make him feel small. I felt a lump in my throat. Emily, I said gently, a man who loves you doesn't make you feel small, and you are not to blame for his unhappiness. She looked down, then whispered, I don't think I can do this anymore. Before I could reply, she turned and walked away. I stood there in the middle of the aisle, heart aching for her, and for the woman I used to be. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I sat with a cup of tea and thought about Emily's words. I realized how easy it was to lose yourself in someone else's shadow, to forget that you were once whole on your own. I thought about calling Robert, demanding answers, but what would be the point? He would charm, deny, twist. He always did, so instead, I prayed for Emily, that she would find the strength I'd once lacked. A few nights later, there was a knock on my door. It was late, nearly 10 p.m. The sound startled me. No one ever visited after dark in Willow Creek. When I opened the door, my breath caught. Emily stood there, her face pale, eyes red from crying. Martha, she whispered, voice shaking, I didn't know where else to go. I stepped aside instantly. Come in. She clutched her purse tightly, her hands trembling. I just left. He got angry because I visited my sister without telling him. He said I embarrassed him. I couldn't stay. Her words tumbled out like broken glass. I led her to the couch, poured her a glass of water, and waited as she tried to steady her breathing. For a long time, we sat in silence. Then she whispered, I thought he'd changed, but it's worse now. He's not the man I thought he was. My chest ached. Sweetheart, I said softly, sometimes people don't change. Sometimes they just reveal who they always were. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I don't know what to do. Right now, I said, you rest. We'll figure it out tomorrow. She nodded, her exhaustion catching up with her. I gave her a blanket and let her sleep on the couch. As I stood watching her, this young woman who had once been the symbol of my heartbreak, I felt something unexpected. Not resentment, not satisfaction, compassion, because I understood now. We were both victims of the same man's selfishness, and in a strange, bittersweet way, maybe we'd both been brought together for a reason. That night, I sat by the window long after she'd fallen asleep. The moonlight washed over the quiet streets, and the old oak tree swayed gently in the breeze. I realized something profound. Forgiveness isn't just about letting go of anger. It's about seeing the humanity in the people who hurt you and choosing peace anyway. I whispered a prayer into the night. Thank you, Lord, for giving me the strength to open my door tonight. Maybe this is how healing begins, not with revenge, but with kindness. When morning came, Emily woke to the smell of coffee. She looked around, confused for a moment, then smiled weakly when she saw me in the kitchen. I can't believe I'm here, she said quietly. Believe it, I replied with a soft smile. You needed help, and once upon a time I needed it too. She sipped her coffee, tears filling her eyes again. You're being kind to me after everything. I don't deserve it. I reached over and touched her hand. We all deserve grace, Emily, even when we think we don't. That morning, I knew our stories had intertwined for good. Two women, one past, one present, both broken by the same man, both standing at the edge of something new. And though neither of us knew what the days ahead would bring, I felt certain of one thing. This was no longer a story about betrayal. It was a story about redemption for both of us. I never thought I'd see Emily again after that awkward encounter at the farmer's market, but life, I've learned, has a curious way of circling back to the people and lessons we try to avoid. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was an unfamiliar number, and I'd promised myself no more surprises. But something inside nudged me, that small whisper that had grown louder since the day Robert walked away. "Hello?" I answered, cautious but polite. There was a long pause, then a soft, trembling voice. "Martha? It's Emily." I froze. Her name alone brought back a whirl of emotions, pain, confusion, that strange flicker of compassion. "Emily," I said slowly. "Is everything all right?" A shaky breath came through the line. I didn't know who else to call. I felt my heart tighten. There was something in her tone, fear, exhaustion, something that didn't belong to the confident young woman who once stood beside my husband. "Do you need help?" I asked. Another silence. Then she whispered, "Can I come over?" When Emily arrived at my door, she looked nothing like the woman who'd turned my world upside down. Her hair was messy, her eyes puffy and red, and she clutched her coat like she was holding herself together. "Come in," I said gently, stepping aside. She hesitated before crossing the threshold, like she wasn't sure she deserved to. I saw myself in her, a younger version of me, worn thin by trying too hard to be loved. I made us tea. It's what I do when words feel too heavy to start with. She stared into her cup for a long time before speaking. "Robert isn't the man I thought he was." Her voice broke on his name. "I know," I said softly, not out of bitterness but recognition. She looked up, surprised. "You do?" I smiled sadly. "I was married to him for 30 years, Emily. I know his good sides, and the ones that hide in the shadows." Tears welled in her eyes. He's changed. He's angry all the time, controlling. He checks my phone, questions where I go. I thought I could make him happy, that if I loved him enough, he'd love me the same way." Her voice trembled. "But he just gets colder. Sometimes I think he regrets choosing me." I wanted to say, "Of course he does," but that would have been cruel, and it wouldn't have been true healing. Instead, I reached out and placed my hand over hers. "Emily, that's not your fault. Robert has always chased the idea of happiness, not the work it takes to keep it." She stared at me, stunned by the kindness. "How can you be so calm about this? After everything?" I took a deep breath. Because anger was eating me alive, and one day I realized I didn't want to carry him in my heart anymore, not even as hate. She wiped her tears. "I thought you'd hate me forever." "I did. For a while." I smiled gently. "But forgiveness isn't for them, Emily. It's for us." She started visiting more often after that. At first, just small talks over tea, then longer visits, helping me in the garden, baking pies for the church fundraiser, sitting on the porch as the sun dipped low over Maple Street. The town folks whispered, "Of course, small towns always do." "Can you believe Martha's having tea with that girl?" they'd murmur. But gossip didn't sting like it used to, maybe because I finally knew who I was without Robert. One evening, as we watered the hydrangeas, Emily asked quietly, "Do you ever miss him?" I paused. The question hung between us like mist. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not the way you think. I miss the man I thought he was, the laughter before the disappointments, the promises before the lies." She nodded slowly. "That's exactly how I feel." Her eyes welled up again, And she looked so young, so lost. I felt a motherly ache stir inside me. "Emily," I said gently, "you don't have to stay trapped in someone else's version of love. You can start again." She shook her head. He'd never let me leave. Those words chilled me. I recognized the fear. I'd lived it once too, just quieter, hidden beneath decades of polite silence and forced smiles. "Does he hurt you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She hesitated. "Not physically, but sometimes his words, they make me feel small, like I'm nothing without him." I felt a tear roll down my cheek. That's how it begins. Slowly, until you start believing it. She looked at me, searching for something. Hope, maybe courage. "How did you finally stop believing it?" I smiled faintly. "When he left, the moment I realized I was still standing." A week later, she brought me an envelope. "These are letters," she said, her voice trembling. "He still writes to you sometimes. I found them in his drawer." I stared at the stack, 5 or 6 letters yellowed at the edges. My name was written on each one in Robert's familiar scrawl. "Why are you giving them to me?" I asked. "Because I think you deserve to know what kind of man he really is." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with those letters spread out like ghosts of our past. I hesitated before opening the first one. "Dear Martha," it began. "I keep thinking I made a mistake." My breath caught. Each letter was the same: confessions of regret, half-hearted apologies, memories of the life we built. He wrote that Emily didn't understand him, that he'd been foolish chasing youth, that he missed my steadiness. By the 4th letter, my tears were steady. Not for him, but for the years I spent blaming myself. He'd left because of his own emptiness, not my shortcomings. The next morning, I found Emily waiting on my porch again. She looked nervous. "Did you read them?" she asked. "I did," I said quietly. "And I think it's time you read them too." She blinked. "Me?" "Yes. You need to see the truth for yourself." We sat together on the porch, reading those letters under the golden morning light. When she finished, she looked shattered. "So all this time," she whispered, "he was still in love with you?" I shook my head. "No, Emily. He was in love with the idea of not being alone." She covered her face with her hands. "I feel so stupid." I gently pulled her into a hug. "You're not stupid. You're human. We all want to be loved, even by the wrong person." For a long while, neither of us spoke. Just the sound of wind rustling through the trees and the creak of the old porch swing. Then, softly, she said, "I think I need to leave him." I looked at her, her tear-streaked face, her trembling hands, and I knew this was the moment she'd begin to reclaim her life. "If you do," I said, "you won't be alone." She smiled weakly. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." I squeezed her hand. "One day you'll pay it forward. That's how healing works. It moves from one heart to another." That night, as I closed my diary, I wrote a simple line. The cracks in her life showed me the ones I'd learned to hide in mine. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a broken woman. I felt like someone who had survived, and was finally strong enough to help someone else do the same. It was nearly midnight when the phone rang. I'd been sitting in my old rocking chair, half asleep, with a book slipping from my hands. Outside, the world was quiet. One of those cool autumn nights when even the crickets seemed too tired to sing. The sound startled me. Few people called me that late anymore, not since Robert left, not since my world had slowed down to a gentler rhythm. I reached for the receiver. "Hello?" At first there was only breathing, uneven, shaky. Then a voice, small and terrified. "Martha, it's me, Emily." My heart sank. "Emily? What's wrong?" She tried to speak but could barely get the words out. "He's gone. Robert's gone." I straightened in my chair. "Gone? What do you mean?" Her voice cracked. "He packed a bag this afternoon, took his car, didn't say where he was going. He just left." The same chill that had filled me years ago now reached through the phone. Only this time, it wasn't for me. It was for her. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered, my heart breaking in a way I didn't think it could anymore. "Where are you right now?" "I'm at home," she sobbed, "but I can't stay here. Everything reminds me of him. Please, can I come to you?" There wasn't even a question in my heart. "Of course, Emily, come." When she arrived, she looked like a ghost of herself. Her clothes were wrinkled, her eyes red and swollen. She clutched a small suitcase and an old photograph, Robert standing beside her at what must have been their wedding. I took it from her hands and set it aside gently. "You're safe here," I said, leading her inside. She collapsed into a chair, covering her face. "I can't believe I'm back here," she murmured. "After everything." I sat across from her. "Emily, you don't need to explain. Sometimes life brings us full circle, not to reopen old wounds, but to finally heal them." Her lip quivered. "He said he loved me, Martha. He promised I was different." I sighed softly. "That's what he told me too once." She looked up at me, her eyes wide with pain. "Does it ever stop hurting?" I reached for her hand. "Yes, but only when you stop trying to understand why he did it. Some people break things because they don't know how to hold them." She cried harder then, the kind of sob that comes from somewhere deep, where years of hope have been buried. I held her while she wept, whispering that she'd be okay, that we both would. Over the next few days, Emily stayed with me. I made her soup, washed her clothes, tried to keep her mind busy. It was strange, living under the same roof as the woman who'd once replaced me. But as I watched her move around my kitchen, quiet and lost, I realized she wasn't my enemy. She was just another woman who'd been caught in Robert's storm. On the third morning, she found me on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the fog roll over the fields. "Martha," she said softly, "I've been thinking about leaving town, maybe moving back to my sister's place in Denver." I turned to her. "Is that what you really want?" She hesitated. "I don't know. Everything here reminds me of what I've lost." "Then maybe it's not the place," I said gently. "Maybe it's the pain you're carrying." She looked down. "I feel so ashamed. Everyone must think I got what I deserved." I reached over and touched her arm. "Emily, people will always talk. But the truth is, life isn't about getting what we deserve. It's about learning what we're meant to learn." Her eyes filled again, but this time not with despair, with gratitude. "You're too kind to me," she whispered. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I smiled softly. None of us earn forgiveness. We just learn to give it when we're ready. That afternoon, we took a walk to the old church garden. The roses had wilted with the season, but their scent still lingered in the air. Emily sat on a bench, staring at the empty swing where she and Robert used to sit. "He proposed to me here," she said quietly. "Right where that swing is?" I nodded. "He proposed to me under that same oak tree." Her eyes widened. "You're kidding." "No," I said, smiling a little. "Same spot, same promise, probably the same speech, too." We both laughed softly, and for the first time it didn't hurt. Emily looked at me, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You must hate me." "I did," I admitted. But not anymore. Because I realized that hate keeps you tied to the past. And I want to live in the present. She took a deep breath. You're stronger than I'll ever be. I shook my head. No, Emily. Strength isn't something you're born with. It's what's left after everything else is taken away. That evening, we heard a knock on the door. Emily froze, her cup trembling in her hands. I rose slowly and opened the door. And there he was. Robert. He looked older, somehow smaller. His hair had thinned, his face lined with regret. For a long moment, none of us spoke. The air was thick with everything that had gone unsaid for years. Martha, he said finally. His voice was low, uncertain. I need to talk. I crossed my arms. I think you've said enough. He looked past me, his eyes landing on Emily. I didn't know where else to go, he said quietly. You both deserve better than me. Emily stood, her face pale. Then why are you here? He sighed. Because I made a mistake. I keep making them. For a moment I almost pitied him. He looked so lost, standing in the doorway like a man who'd built 2 homes and belonged to neither. Robert, I said calmly, this isn't the place for you anymore. Not mine. Not hers. He looked at me, his eyes wet. You're right. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I nodded. Then say it. And go. He swallowed hard, then whispered, I'm sorry. Emily turned away, tears streaming down her face. I felt my own heart ache, not for him, but for the years we both had lost chasing someone who could never stay. When he left, the door clicked softly behind him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Emily whispered, How did you do that? How were you so calm? I smiled faintly. Because I finally realized I didn't need anything from him. Not closure, not apology. I already had peace. Later that night, Emily came to me as I sat by the fireplace. I'm leaving tomorrow, she said softly. My sister's expecting me. I nodded. You'll be okay, Emily. She knelt beside me and hugged me tight. Thank you for saving me, Martha. I shook my head. You saved yourself. I just reminded you that you could. When she pulled away, she smiled through her tears. I'll never forget you. Don't, I said gently, but don't stay stuck here either. Go live. Be free. The next morning, I stood on the porch as her taxi pulled away. The autumn wind carried the scent of change, the kind that comes not with pain, but with peace. As I watched her disappear down Maple Street, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time in years, I wasn't the woman left behind. I was the woman who stayed, who forgave, who healed, who helped another soul rise from the ashes. I walked back inside and opened my diary. The page was blank, waiting for something new. I wrote, When the woman he left me for called for help, I realized the universe wasn't asking me to reopen old wounds. It was giving me a chance to heal them. And for the first time in a long while, I smiled. Because even in the quiet house, I didn't feel alone anymore. The house felt different after Emily left. Quieter, yes, but not empty. It was as if her laughter, her tears, her soft footsteps had left behind a warmth that lingered in the air. I'd grown used to the sound of another heartbeat in the house, the rhythm of shared mornings and late-night talks. Now, there was only the steady tick of the old clock and the creak of the floorboards under my slippers. But the silence no longer frightened me. It felt peaceful. Like the kind that comes after a long storm. A week after Emily left, I received a letter. The envelope was pale blue, her handwriting neat but trembling. Dear Martha, I made it to Denver. My sister cried when she saw me. said I look like a shadow of myself. But I'm eating again, sleeping, smiling even. It feels strange, learning to breathe without asking permission first. Thank you for everything. For opening your door when you had every reason not to. For showing me what grace looks like. I don't know if I'll ever be as strong as you, but I'm trying. With love, Emily. I pressed the letter to my heart and smiled. It felt like a circle had closed, not perfectly, but beautifully. The days slipped into winter. The town was dressed in white, quiet and still, like the world had taken a deep breath. I spent most of my time baking pies for the church, knitting scarves for the shelter, and volunteering at the community library. People would often stop to chat, and though many still whispered about the strange friendship between me and the other woman, their tone had changed. Now when I walked down Main Street, they smiled differently, like they'd seen something in me they respected, even if they didn't understand it. Mrs. Landon from the bakery said one morning, "You've changed, Martha. There's something lighter about you these days." I smiled as I picked up my loaf of bread. That's what happens when you finally stop carrying what's not yours. One afternoon, I received a call from the local women's shelter. They needed volunteers to help women starting over, those leaving behind broken marriages or abusive homes. Something inside me stirred. I signed up that same day. The first time I sat across from a woman trembling with fear and doubt, I saw 100 reflections of myself and of Emily. One of them, a young mother named Carla, whispered, "I don't think I can make it on my own." I reached for her hand and said, "You already have. You just don't see it yet." As she smiled through her tears, I realized helping others was healing me too. Every story I heard, every life I touched, it was another piece of my heart mending itself back together. Then, one snowy evening, I got another letter. This time, the handwriting was unfamiliar, but the name on the return address made my breath catch. Robert. I hesitated before opening it. My hands shook, but not from fear, just the weight of old memories. "Dear Martha, I don't know what right I have to write you after everything I've done, but I wanted you to know I'm sorry, truly. Not the kind of sorry that comes with excuses, but the kind that keeps you up at night. Emily told me what you did for her. I can't believe you had that much kindness left in you after what I put you through. I've lost everything, my marriage, my job, my pride. But maybe that's what I needed to find something real inside myself again. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Robert." I read it twice, then I folded it carefully and tucked it away in my diary. No tears came, no anger, just a quiet, settled calm. Because the truth was, I had already forgiven him long before he'd found the courage to say sorry. Winter turned to spring. The air smelled of lilacs again, and the town came alive with color. The old maple tree in my yard stretched toward the sky, full of new leaves, proof that life always renews itself no matter how harsh the winter. One sunny afternoon, as I was tending my garden, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Emily stepped out, her hair longer, her face brighter. She looked like a different woman, stronger, freer. "Martha," she called, smiling wide. I ran to her and hugged her tight. "Look at you," I said, tears welling in my eyes. "You look happy." "I am," she laughed. "I got a job teaching art classes to kids. I even rented my own place." I beamed. "That's wonderful." She handed me a small wrapped box. "I brought you something." Inside was a framed painting, a watercolor of my porch, the one where we used to sit together with tea and quiet conversation. In the corner, she'd painted two women sitting side by side, their heads bowed in gentle laughter. I touched the frame, speechless. "I wanted you to have it," she said softly. "To remember that sometimes the people who break us are the ones who help us find each other." I hugged her again. "Oh, Emily, you're proof that forgiveness is never wasted." She smiled through her tears. "And you're proof that love doesn't die. It just changes shape." That night, I wrote in my diary again. The pages had become my silent witnesses through everything: grief, anger, healing, grace. When Robert left, I thought my story ended, but it turns out it was only beginning. Because sometimes God doesn't fix what's broken, He gives you the strength to build something new from the pieces. I looked out the window at the blooming hydrangeas, their petals dancing in the evening breeze. For years, I'd thought love meant holding on, but now I understood. It also means knowing when to let go, and in letting go, I had found peace. Weeks later, the Women's Shelter organized a community event called New Beginnings. They asked me to speak. I almost said no. Public speaking had never been my strength. But something inside me said this was part of my purpose now. That evening, I stood on the small stage at the town hall. Dozens of faces looked up at me, some familiar, some strangers, many with tears already in their eyes. I took a breath and began. "I used to believe that when someone walks out of your life, they take your happiness with them, but what I've learned is this: no one can steal your peace unless you hand it to them." The room went silent. "I lost a husband once," I continued, my voice steady. "But what I really lost was the version of myself who thought I wasn't enough. And when I found her again, I realized she'd been waiting all along, patient, strong, and ready to live." There were soft sobs in the audience, a quiet ripple of emotion that told me my pain had found purpose. I smiled and ended with the words that had carried me through my darkest nights. Forgiveness isn't saying what happened was okay. It's saying you're done letting it hurt you. The audience rose to their feet. Some clapped, others cried. But I just stood there, humbled, knowing that in helping them, I had healed myself too. That night, as I returned home, the stars were bright above Maple Street. The air felt full of possibility, like life was whispering, "You did it. You made it through." I sat on my porch, where it had all begun, where I'd cried, mourned, and eventually laughed again. And as the night breeze brushed against my skin, I whispered a quiet prayer of thanks for Emily, for forgiveness, for the strength to keep choosing love, even after heartbreak. I used to think forgiveness was something you gave to other people, a gift wrapped in patience, tied with grace and handed over to those who wronged you. But now, sitting on my porch with the fading light kissing the horizon, I realize it's something you give yourself first. You forgive so you can breathe again. It had been almost a year since Emily came into my life, a year since the night she called for help. The woman I once thought had stolen everything from me was now sitting across from me on my porch, sipping sweet tea, her hair pulled back, her eyes soft but stronger. She'd found a small apartment in town, started teaching art classes at the community center, and was slowly building herself back up. I looked at her and saw not the younger woman who had wrecked my marriage, but a young soul who had been lied to, manipulated, and broken, just like I once was. One morning in early spring, I found a letter tucked under my door. The handwriting was unmistakably Robert's, neat, practiced, almost formal. My heart gave a tiny flutter, not of longing, but of something I couldn't quite name. I stood there for a moment, holding the envelope, before walking to the kitchen table and opening it. Martha, I know I'm the last person who deserves to ask you for anything, but I need to see you, just once. Not to beg, not to explain, but to say what should have been said a long time ago. I'll be at the bench by the lake at 5 p.m. tomorrow. If you don't come, I'll understand. Robert. I sat there, the letter trembling in my hands. Part of me wanted to burn it. Another part, the one that had prayed for closure, whispered softly, "Go." The next day, I walked to the lake just as the sun was starting to lower itself into the water, staining it gold and pink. That old wooden bench was still there, the one Robert and I used to sit on during Sunday picnics decades ago. He was already waiting. For a moment, I saw not the man who had left me, but the man I once loved, older now, thinner, with hair more silver than gray. His eyes, though, were the same, deep, regretful, searching. "Martha," he said, standing. "You came." "I did," I answered quietly, sitting down beside him but leaving space between us. There was silence, long, heavy, but not bitter. Just the kind that happens when two people finally stop pretending. He looked out at the water. "I made a mess of everything," he said. "I thought I wanted freedom. I thought I wanted excitement, youth. But all I found was emptiness. You spent 30 years holding me up, and I repaid you by tearing us apart." I listened, not with anger anymore, but with a strange calm. For years, I had replayed this moment in my head, imagining all the things I would say, all the ways I'd make him feel the pain I did. But now that it was here, I just felt tired. "Robert," I said softly, "you don't have to explain. We were both young once. We both made choices. I just hope you find peace." He turned to me, eyes wet. "You already have, haven't you?" I nodded. "I'm working on it." He smiled faintly. "I'm glad Emily had you to turn to. I know how that sounds, but she told me what you did for her. Thank you." That's when the tears finally came. Not from sorrow, but from release. Because in that moment I realized I wasn't holding on to him anymore. I was holding on to the version of me that needed his apology to heal, and she didn't exist now. When he stood, I did too. He looked frail, humbled. "I don't expect forgiveness," he whispered. "I already gave it," I said. "You just didn't know." He nodded, then reached out and gently touched my hand. "You were always the better one." I smiled faintly. "No, Robert. I just learned the hard way." He left then, his figure small against the fading sky, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't watch him go with sadness. I watched him as part of my past, a chapter I had finished, a story I had already outgrown. That evening, I invited Emily over for dinner. We cooked together, laughter mixing with the sound of sizzling vegetables, and for the first time, the house felt warm again. Not because Robert was in it, but because we were. Two women who had been broken by the same man, now rebuilding a life not defined by him. Later that night, after Emily left, I sat on the porch swing with my journal. The night air was soft and kind, filled with the sound of crickets and distant wind chimes. I opened to a blank page and wrote, "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's remembering without pain. It's choosing peace over pride. It's learning that sometimes The person you save is yourself. I closed the journal and looked up at the stars, thousands of tiny lights scattered across the dark, each one a reminder that even the smallest flicker could pierce the deepest night. And in that moment, I knew I had forgiven, I had healed, and I was finally free.